Thank you again for coming to our presentation. I'd like to also introduce Ms. Juliette Schmidt from Niles North and Mr. Jerry Pope. He is the Dean of College Counseling for both Niles North and Niles West. I'm going to steal a little of Jerry's thunder. As we know, the financial aid, FAFSA, is a graduation requirement for the state of Illinois. Niles North last year had reached platinum and Niles West reached gold on everyone completing it. So we hope to maintain that momentum this year and have everyone fill it out. Without further ado, I'm turning it over to Mr. Jerry Cebrzynski from Lake Forest College.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Allegra. Thanks, Jerry. So as always, I'm excited to be here tonight because a couple things. I love what I do. I love sharing my information with you guys. I love the whole field of financial aid, college costs, how exciting and wonderful it is. I liked it in Dan's introduction. He said I was the best man in Illinois regarding financial aid. So a little caveat there, but at least I got that going for me. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Thanks for letting me chat with you guys about the wonderful world of college costs, financial aid. A lot to share with you. Let's make sure that technology is our friend as I share my screen with you. And Allegra and Dan and Jerry, let's make sure. Do you guys see it? Can you all see it? Wonderful. So it's really just kind of going through the process of understanding what's happening these days and what's going to happen with you all as parents and as students, over the next few months, kind of walk you through the process. Talk a little bit and make sure my slides advanced. Did they? Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Talk a little bit about the real cost of college, what families are really paying out of pocket these days versus what colleges charge and why there's a difference and kind of what that difference is. Talk a little bit about the financial aid applications, scholarship applications, the offers that you get from colleges to make it an affordable choice for you. A couple websites and a couple different ways that you can compare the offers so you are comparing apples to apples, which is very important. And I'll tell you why a little bit later on. Some of the deadlines involved, where you can find help, and like really everything in between those bullet points there. I get passionate about this subject because there is so much that I want to share with you. And it's really, truly not overwhelming. When all is said and done, at the end of this, you will be excited, and you will be as passionate as I am. That's my hope. So getting started, and the reason that I kind of start with the real cost of college is because very, very, very few people are paying what colleges charge. Over 80% of all freshmen at every college, every 2-year, 4-year, public, private, college, university across the country get some kind of financial help with the cost. Over 90% at private colleges, and I'm not exaggerating when I say at private colleges, that percentage can be 95%, can be 98, 99%. I actually have an example to show you. So very few people are actually paying the sticker price. And of all the financial aid that is offered to a family, almost 2/3 of it is in the form of what we call gift aid, a grant or a scholarship, nothing that's paid back. In my profession, as in many of yours maybe, we have our language, our financial aid speak in acronyms, and I'll go through some of that so you have a sense of what we're talking about when a financial aid or even an admissions counselor kind of lapses into that kind of lingo. And I will, I tell every family that if you're even thinking about it or on the fence about applying, absolutely do it. I mean, statistically, your chances are great. And let's keep up the platinum level at North, and let's make it a platinum level, at West. So, kind of take a look at the FAFSA, which, I'll talk about in just a little bit. Putting costs, kind of the sticker price in perspective, to give you a sense of what colleges are charging out there. For a 4-year public university, on average, we're looking at about $27,000. But even that's on the low end. University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, tuition fees, room and board, almost $40,000 a year. And a lot of out-of-state public universities for out-of-state students cost $40, $50, $60,000 even. On the other end of the spectrum are the private colleges and universities, where on average it's about $55,000 a year. But there are over 700 colleges whose kind of their sticker price, as I call it, exceeds $70,000 a year. But then I go back to that previous slide that says, especially at the private colleges, 95% of the students are not paying, 70,000. They're not paying 55. They're not paying 27. In many cases, they're paying far less than that. I love this website, and I share this website every year with families, collegecost.ed.gov, for a few different reasons. Every one of these pictures on this is a link to another website. And there's a couple on here that I use all the time. College Navigator gives you a really nice sense of upfront what a college has to offer, what they're all about, where they're located, the type of college they are. And I've got some screenshots to show you, and all the different categories where you can find out a little bit more kind of on the front end of the college. And on the back end of the college scorecard really gives you a sense of how colleges are doing and really how they're delivering on the promises that they make. The scorecard, the Navigator, has been around for a while. The scorecard has only been around for about 4 or 5 years now, and it's getting much better. And I have screenshots to show you of that. Speaking of which, when you go to the College Navigator and you plug in the name of the school, this is the very first thing that you will see. And of course, I use Lake Forest College as an example. This gives you a sense of what kind of school we are, where we're located, what our enrollment is. And every one of those categories below, you can drill down and get even more information about everything from just general information to admissions criteria, to the varsity athletic teams, campus security, cohort default rates, and really everything in between. If you were to drill down on financial aid, and this is not a Lake Forest example, here I just kind of plugged in DePaul University, for example. This is where I talk about how many colleges, including DePaul, give you a sense of how many students are receiving financial aid and what they're receiving, and on average, how much do they receive. Here, at DePaul University, 98% of the first year class received some type of financial aid. 97% of them received gift aid, a grant or a scholarship, where it was like, almost $30,000. These amounts will be updated, by the way, and I want to make a point of saying that both these websites are updated annually, and we're just now feeding the information from the previous school year, from the 2021 school year, into these websites. So within another couple of weeks to a month or so, you'll see some of these figures being as of the very last school year that we completed, which honestly probably won't be very, very different from what you see here. When you drill down into a category called net price, this is what you'll see. And in fact, make mention again of it's a 3-year kind of data that you'll see, but that 2017-18 will drop off, and 2020-2021 will be added onto that. Net price, the definition of net price is, it's one of those buzzwords, the lingo in our profession, where tuition, fees, room and board, minus gift aid, and gift aid only, grants and scholarships. That's the net price. That's what families are paying without looking at other options like student loans or work study or outside scholarships. This website gives you some income bands that are decent. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit, because this gives you a sense of where you might fall in the different income bands and how much you might receive, for that. The net price calculator, which at the very bottom of this page you'll see, is also a relatively new concept. It's only about 4 or 5 years old. The net price calculator is available on every college's website, and it gives you a more detailed information about that college itself, and not just in general. That college, DePaul University, for example, and when you plug in your information. And again, in just another slide or two, I'll show you that. But at the bottom of this page on the College Navigator, you'll see a link to that college's net price calculator. The college scorecard I really like, because it really gives you a sense of how well colleges are performing, not only what their costs are, and some of the data on the Navigator and the scorecard overlap. but there's enough different data that makes it worthwhile to use the navigator and the scorecard, even at this time of year, to start researching colleges out there, because the scorecard will tell you things like graduation rates and the average amount of student loan debt that students have, and earnings potential. If students are getting a job within a couple of years after undergrad, kind of what they're earning. The other nice thing about the scorecard is that it's very interactive and updated regularly. You can literally go in and say, show me a school that has a 98% graduation rate, that offers at least $30,000 in gift aid to its students, and is faith-based, and offers a degree in archaeology. You can get as specific as that with the scorecard. And then you can side-by-side comparison, with the different colleges that may pop up with your query there. This is, again, I use Drake University just as an example. Drake in Des Moines with about 3,000 undergrads. This is the first thing you'll see on the scorecard, the institutional highlights. It'll show you what their graduation rate is. And what's interesting is that the graduation rate on the scorecard is actually an 8-year graduation rate, which seems really strange. It actually is strange to me. But many colleges will report what their 5 or 6-year graduation rate is, because that's the norm now. Why the scorecard says you can report up to 8 years is kind of interesting. But at Drake, 78% of their students who started as freshmen graduated within 5 or 6 years. That last, the average annual cost, that's the net price. So at Drake, they cost about $60,000 a year. But $60,000 after the gift aid, the grant or scholarship that they award to families are paying half of that. So they're paying a little less than half. They're paying about $29,000. That salary after completing what's in the middle there, that's just the range of what students earn if they get a job after leaving Drake. Within a couple of years after leaving Drake, they start earning anywhere from $20,000 to $79,000 a year. If this were a Lake Forest College example, that salary after completing that range would be from $50,000 to $120,000. But I'm just saying, I'm just putting that out there. More of the highlights of the scorecard. These are different categories that you can drill down into. And here's where I talk about where it's interactive, that you can actually kind of ask for different things. Show me colleges that have this academic field, that have graduation rates, average annual costs, test scores, the size of the school, whether they're faith-based or not. I like the scorecard because it really gives you a sense of the different schools out there, and it really does help compare schools for each of these categories. Really a nice side-by-side comparison. I jump back to the net price calculator because that's the tool that you can find on every college's website. That's something you could play with tonight if you wanted to, because you'll be so excited about this, where it's specific to that college. It'll ask the student to plug in a little bit about where they're coming from academically and where the family is coming from financially, to give you a sense of how generous that college might be in terms of the average grants and scholarships. It'll also give you some ideas about student loan options, work study options. My last bullet point comes in many shapes and sizes. Yeah, some of them lots of bells and whistles and colorful charts and everything. Others are pretty bare bones, but they really do the same thing. They all tell you kind of on average what your costs might be, what kind of gift assistance, self-help or gift aid that you might receive from the college itself. Net price calculators can be a little limiting, especially when it comes to special circumstances that a lot of families have, and especially have had over the last 18 months. I'll save that for just a little bit later on. But when we talk about financial aid, when any colleges addresses this, or you read about this, or you hear about this, financial aid is anything and everything that has a dollar amount attached to it that is offered to a student, whether it's a scholarship or a grant, the gift aid, or self-help, which is a student loan or work study. Student does something else to take advantage of that. And obviously with student loans, they pay those back when they're no longer a student. With work study, they're earning as they go. They're working as they study. But it's anything and everything that is offered to a family to help them with the discount, to help against the sticker price. coming from a variety of sources, 5 major sources. I've added the 5th one really just within the last few years, but the federal government funds all of the federal grant programs, federal Pell Grant, the federal student loan programs, federal work study programs. Every state also funds its own grant and scholarship programs for its residents. Here in Illinois, it's the Illinois Student Assistance Commission is the agency that not only gave kudos to North and to West for their FAFSA completion, but they also administer the state grant program called the Illinois MAP grant, the Monetary Award Program. And I'm sorry, there are acronyms and I lapse into those, but the MAP grant is something that you will see a lot more about and hear a lot more about from colleges and from the state. The MAP grant, if a student is eligible for that, can be used at any college, any university in Illinois. It cannot be taken out of Illinois, but if you're eligible for it, it's worth $5,500. Exactly, it's $5,496, but we also think they're going to increase that for next year as well. The state, ISAC, also administers some scholarships for students going into the teaching professions, and even first-year students who have an intent to go into the teaching profession would qualify to apply for those teaching scholarships, which also have a value of $5,000 each. And then colleges and universities themselves are a huge source of funding these days. It's not surprising that when all is said and done and you're looking at the offer that you receive, that 75% of the funding is coming from the college itself. The rest is coming from the federal government, the state, or outside scholarships. I am passionate about outside scholarships, and I have to be very careful to not get on my high horse or my soapbox about that, but really encourage parents and students to do everything they can to take advantage of all of the outside scholarships that are out there. We've seen an increase in outside scholarships over the last 5 years, more than we've ever seen before. There are, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And on average, the statistics say that when students bring in an outside scholarship, they're bringing in on average about $2,500 to the mix. And I've been in this profession for almost 4 decades, 39 years. And it's rare these days, especially, do I ever see a college reduce what it offers to a student if the student brings in an outside scholarship? Because, for a lot of different reasons. One, we want it to be a win-win, situation. We want the student to bring in more money so they can rely less on student loans or work study, or ultimately it lowers your out of pocket. So anything and everything that you can do to take advantage of some of these outside sources for scholarships, please do. Employers is the source that I added just over the last few years, because again, in the last few years, more than I've ever seen in the last 4 decades, more and more employers, as part of their benefits package, sometimes it's part of like the cafeteria plan that you see. Some of them are offering small scholarships to dependents of their employees. So whether if your employer does that or not, it absolutely is worth researching and asking HR if that's something to take advantage of, because I certainly have seen more employers offer something like that as kind of a nice little perk for its employees. When we categorize financial aid, any college, any financial aid geek, or anyone that you're talking to, we use 2 broad categories. There's merit-based financial aid and there's need-based financial aid. Merit-based has absolutely nothing to do with where a family is coming from financially, and everything to do with what the student is bringing to the table. So based on the student's application for admission, based on perhaps their test scores, their letters of recommendation, their writing samples, so many things are being considered at the time of admission for not only to see if they're admissible, but also to see if they qualify for any of the merit-based scholarships that the college offers. And not just academic-based anymore, but so many colleges are offering scholarships, talent-based scholarships, based on a student being involved in fine arts or athletics or leadership abilities, or how well they write, or Were they involved in social justice, activities or green initiatives or all sorts of different things? The college will automatically consider the student based on their application for all of the scholarships that they offer. But it's a really good question, to ask colleges and as part of your research to look to see if perhaps something else is required beside just the admission application or just an interview to take advantage of some of those other talent-based scholarships out there. Because, quite honestly, like for some of the fine arts, yes, there'll be portfolios submitted for an art scholarship or an audition for music or the theater. But in addition to merit-based scholarships, we piggyback on that. Colleges piggyback on that with the need-based financial aid. And that's where the additional grants come into play, and the federal grants and the student loans and the work study. And it's a combination of merit-based and need-based that families receive. I talked earlier about, it's like at private colleges, over 90% of students get some kind of financial aid. Of that 90%, probably 80% of those families are receiving need-based financial aid in addition to the merit-based financial aid. To be considered for merit-based, really just kind of start and finish the admission process, but also ask if there's anything additional that you need to do to take advantage of those. And quite honestly, when you get your response back, when the student gets their admission letter and they find out they're getting a $30,000 scholarship or a full tuition scholarship, if that's good enough, if you say, yes, that's what we need to make it affordable, you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to go through the rest of the process, even though I would strongly encourage you to do that. And, obviously, public high schools in Illinois, that's one of the requirements. But filling out a FAFSA to see what else is out there, I absolutely think it's a no-brainer because you have absolutely nothing to lose. The universal application, the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, that's not just an Illinois thing. That's what every family is completing for every college, every university, throughout the country. It asks some really basic demographic information to identify the student and some basic financial data about the family to create an index number of sorts. It's the index number that tells us in a financial aid office kind of where the family falls along the continuum of either, yes, absolutely eligible for federal grants, or maybe not federal grants, but the Illinois MAP grant, or neither, but something from the college itself. It's also just a really nice jumping off point or a starting point because it's, as we'll see, it's not the end all. It is not the best application that we've seen out there. It can use some improvements, and improvements are coming down the pike, in just another year or two. But until that happens, it's a good starting point to tell a college that, yeah, you are interested in finding out what else is out there. Several different ways that you can fill out the FAFSA. 3 of them I strongly discourage. 2 of them I highly encourage. The FAFSA on the web is the preferred method. That's the online application. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. 97.8% of all the FAFSAs that were filed, okay, I just kind of pulled that out of my out of the hat, but really probably about 98% of all the FAFSAs filed this year were done online. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to download an application called the My Student Aid mobile app. Really, the only difference between the two is when you're doing it online, you're doing it using the internet. When you're doing the mobile app, you're either using Wi-Fi or you're using your data plan. And if you don't mind, filling out a form, looking on your phone or wherever you download the apps, it does the same thing as the FAFSA on the web. Now, the only difference, and they're working on a fix for this though, is if you start the FAFSA using the My Student Aid mobile app, you have to finish it on the app. You can't start it on the FAFSA on the web and complete it on the app. They don't talk to each other right now for security purposes. So however you start it, that's how you need to end it. The other 3, kind of briefly, I'll talk about the paper FAFSA. You would literally have to order a paper FAFSA from the Department of Education, from federal student aid programs. They would mail it to you. You fill it out, you mail it back, and it can take anywhere from 12 to 16 weeks to be processed. And I don't exaggerate on that at all, as opposed to the FAFSA on the web or the My Student Aid mobile app, where it's done instantaneously and like literally within 24 to 48 hours, colleges can download the results to give you a sense of what it means to them. The FAFSA on the phone, you could call the federal student aid programs and they could take your answers over the phone. You'd still need to follow up with a signature page and kind of what we call the wet signature, and that can take weeks to be processed. And then the FAA access to the CPS online, that just means it's a backdoor that a college has that could enter this information for you, but you'd have to get the college to agree to do that. And very few colleges will do that because one, they don't have the staffing to do it, especially, look at some of the large publics where they're looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of applications. They just don't have the time to be able to do that. And if they did, it would only be for that college. So if your child is looking at 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 colleges, you'd have to get all of them to agree to do that for you. So again, that's why I go back to saying FAFSA on the web or even the My Student Aid mobile app, absolutely those are the ways to fill out the FAFSA. Here's a screenshot of the FAFSA itself, the FAFSA on the web. Not very glamorous, not very colorful even, but here it's very utilitarian. Here is where you'll see your starting point. The very first time you fill out a FAFSA, you'll click on that, new to the FAFSA process, start here. You can start to fill out the FAFSA and save it and go back and forth as many times as you want. You don't have to do it all in one sitting. When you save it and you go back into it, you're considered a returning user. So you'll click on that login, button below. But honestly, if you saved it and you clicked on new to the FAFSA process, start here, it would automatically direct you to the FAFSA that you've already got, started on file. So you can't go wrong with either of those. Just a couple screenshots of the My Student Aid mobile app. This is what you would see. Again, does the exact same thing. The nice thing about the My Student Aid mobile app is it's a little bit more encouraging than the FAFSA on the web, only in that the little prompts you get like halfway through, little balloons pop up that say, hey, you're almost done, keep going, or 2/3 of the way through, hey, you can get there, we know you can do it. And then I'm not kidding, literally at the very end, after you submit it, like you see the little confetti fall down, on the screen. So for that purpose, I like the app. I like the FAFSA on the web because I need a bigger screen. I can't just be doing that on my phone anymore these days. I love the screen. This is one of my favorite ones. That's all that means. Just I need to remember to hydrate. We all need to remember to hydrate, right? So that's all that was. The overview of the FAFSA. And I should change this wording a little bit, but I have that it's available October 1st. It opens October 1st. So you cannot access it until October 1st of the student's senior year in high school. That doesn't mean that it's due on October 1st, by no means. Excuse me, and we'll talk about deadlines a little bit later, but the very earliest that you can even access it is October 1st, and it's only accessible at the website fafsa.gov. There's a couple knockoff sites out there that will tell you, hey, we'll help you fill out your FAFSA for the low fee of only $500. Please be very careful with that. The fafsa.gov website is the only legitimate website for the FAFSA. It's 7 steps long. It's based on your 2020 tax year. Now, that has changed recently within the last few years or so, because there was a time when the FAFSA didn't open until January 1st. And then it would ask you about your income for the most recent tax year, which would be the one that you hadn't filed your taxes yet in January, but you would be filing them in January, February, March, or by April. The FAFSA was moved to October 1st. It opened October 1st to kind of line it up and move it more in sync with the admission application, the application for admission process, where students are filling out the admission applications and the financial aid applications kind of simultaneously on parallel tracks. I like that it's available earlier because it gives us more time to chat with families, more relaxed time. Used to be like, when it opened in January, it was like tax season, crunch time, where when families would fill it out, we thought, okay, let's hurry up, let's have a conversation, let's make a decision. It's 7 steps long, as I mentioned, and most of those will ask about demographics of the student, kind of identifying information, but some of those will ask you about the income. And it references the 2020 tax year because that's what's on file with the IRS. That's what's available to pull into the FAFSA using a real nifty tool called the Irs Data Retrieval tool. When you get to that point of the FAFSA and it asks you the income questions, you will literally link to the IRS database, answer a few questions there, and just pull that information back into the FAFSA. Both sites are extremely secure. So there's no loss of data in transmission or fear of hacking or anything like that. I've never ever seen that, knock wood. I've never seen that happen. But using the IRS data retrieval tool to pull in the income from 2020 is the best way to do that, because if you don't, colleges will follow up with you to ask you for an actual copy of the 2020 tax return. Now, the 2020 tax return is, again, more of a starting point, and especially with what has happened over the last 18 months in many, many cases, 2020 may not be indicative of what 21 is, or even what 22, is going to be. We'll talk about that in just a second. Here's what you'll see when you're looking at the FAFSA, kind of the different parallel tracks within the FAFSA itself. Asks about the students, their demographic information, their identifying information, name, address, social security number, date of birth, if they had income, and what their taxable income was. Similarly for parents, they'll ask a little bit about who you are, and the family size, how many people living at home, how many will be in college, how old are the parents. Your income, you can pull that in with the IRS data retrieval tool, both the taxable income and the untaxed income. It'll ask about assets, but I want to hold on to that for right now, because ultimately they do not come into play much at all during this process. The one feature on the FAFSA I do want to point out is that you're filling out one FAFSA for all the schools that your child is looking at. So you're not filling out one FAFSA per school. It's, if you have one child in college, you're filling out just one FAFSA, and the information is being sent to all of the different schools simultaneously. Initially, you can list up to 10 colleges on the FAFSA, and I don't, with technology and it being a cloud-based application, I don't understand why they limit it to 10 colleges, but it is easy enough to go back in and to add the 11th, 12th, and 13th college after the first 10 have been processed. Every college has its unique Fafsa code called a federal student aid code, a federal school code, a Fafsa code. It's a 6-digit code that you plug into the Fafsa so that it allows that college to go in and draw down that information electronically. Especially important for systems like Wisconsin, where University of Wisconsin-Madison has a different Fafsa code than La Crosse, than Whitewater, than Milwaukee. At Lake Forest, our Fafsa code is 001706. Just in case you wanted to jot that down, 001706. One of the very first things a college's website will tell you is what their Fafsa code is. And also in the Fafsa itself, when you get to that section, you'll be able to search for the Fafsa code for the school by just answering a couple questions, name of the school, kind of where they're located, and then just be able to plug that Fafsa code, into it. Some of the frequently asked questions that we do get about the Fafsa itself, first have to deal with the definition of parents. And if parents are married, then both parents' information is required on the Fafsa. If parents are divorced or separated and not remarried, then it's the parent that the student lives with or has lived with the most over the last 12 months. That becomes the parent of record for the Fafsa. We also call that the custodial parent. Only the custodial parent's information is required on the Fafsa. Now, if that custodial parent has remarried, then the step parent's information is also required, on the Fafsa. Fafsa does not ask anything about the other parent, the non-custodial parent. Other applications might, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit too. But there's also been a change in the definition of parents, within the last few years, 4 or 5 years now, I think, where if both biological parents are living together, but not legally married, still both biological parents' information are required on the Fafsa. And then the other definition change was same gender parents. If parents are same gender and legally married, both parents are, information is required on the FAFSA. I kind of glossed over assets when I talked about the FAFSA itself and the income questions that it has, because really, truly, the FAFSA is more income driven than anything else. Statistically, and we get these stats from the Department of Ed, only 2% of all families last year when they filled out the FAFSA had enough assets or asset strength to really impact their eligibility, to kind of make it, to move the needle on that index number, so to speak. And when we talk about assets, what we're not talking about is anything to do with home equity or retirement accounts or insurance policies or annuities or even health savings accounts. And that's a new question that has come up recently. Those are excluded from the FAFSA. The only thing included on the FAFSA are anything that you might have in savings or stocks or other real estate other than your primary residence, the value of that, or what's becoming more and more common, 529 plans. These are kind of bona fide education savings plans that families have put aside, have saved for college costs. So if there's, the rule of thumb is, if it's an asset whereby if you withdrew from it, there'd be a penalty for early withdrawal, then it's not an asset for the FAFSA. If it's like a 529 plan or savings or anything like that, money that you could use to help pay for college costs, then it is an asset on the FAFSA. But again, unless that your asset strength, unless your net worth of 529 plans and savings and even other real estate, unless it exceeds $250,000, it really has very little impact on the eligibility, because again, quite literally, the formula that is being used behind the scenes is for that particular piece of it. It's like 11% of 22% times 7% of the assets. So it really comes down to very little impact. And that's on purpose, because colleges and even the Department of Education want families to save, and they don't want them to be penalized for saving, for college. And I predict, if I had a little crystal ball, I would predict that within a couple of years, we will see asset questions come off of the FAFSA completely. The other last bullet point, which I've talked about already, is that it's one FAFSA per student, not one FAFSA per college. Throughout this process, and when you do take a look, when you are able to get into the FAFSA and you start to fill it out, you're going to notice that it's really cut and dry. Doesn't ask you anything other than how many people living at home, how many are in college, what was your income in 2020, period, end of story. Does not allow you to color outside the lines or do stream of consciousness or get creative in any way whatsoever. But we know that special circumstances are happening with families, and we want and can take those into consideration at the college level, especially, looking at the last, it's going on 2 years, of this pandemic. So even though the FAFSA may ask you what 2020 income was, that may not really be reflective of what it's going to be. Or, there may have been healthcare expenses you paid in 2020 or project to pay in 2021 or even 2022, or private school tuition or support to extended family or unusual expenses like funeral expenses and emergency home repair. There's so many things that colleges can take into consideration before in order to tailor the response back to the family, to make it a very personalized response to enhance and kind of give as much financial aid as it possibly can to the family, because ultimately, colleges want a student who is admissible to choose that college, and we want to make it a very affordable choice for them. So several different ways that you can tell us at the college level what's going on in your life, either through the use of a common supplemental financial aid application out there called the CSS, College Scholarship Service Financial Aid Profile, or the college may have its own application for financial aid, or even what I'm seeing more and more are standalone applications. So if you're talking to a college and you say, hey, I had some healthcare expenses that, we paid more than we thought we were going to pay out of pocket. So the school may have you fill out the healthcare expense form, or there's a drop in income, they'll fill out the income change form, or all sorts of the unusual expense form, all sorts of different things. a good question to ask colleges or as part of your research, one of the things you'll notice is what are the requirements to be considered for financial aid? First and foremost, and 100% of the time, the FAFSA, and then maybe the profile or maybe the school's own application for financial aid. Here's a screenshot. I include this of the profile itself for a couple of reasons. One, it's a little bit more colorful than the FAFSA website. And then the lower left-hand corner there, that's where you can check to see what colleges or even what scholarship programs require you to fill out the profile to be considered for money from those scholarship programs or from the college itself. Because what we're trying to do behind the scenes, what's happening, in my office and offices, thousands of financial aid offices across the country, is we're trying to figure out how much we can offer to a family, how much you need in order to make our particular college affordable. So we know what our costs are. We're trying to figure out what you need. And so we spend all of our time based on that middle button there to kind of figure out how much a family can reasonably afford to contribute toward those costs. The universal philosophy, what's driving colleges across the country, is that this truly is a partnership, and we look at students and parents to be primary partners and to do everything that you can to the extent that you're able. And we won't be too unreasonable, most of the time. But students, it's a student's education. So we want them to know, that what they need to do to take advantage of, and it's their student loan. So how much loan do they have? It's their scholarship. What are the renewal requirements for that scholarship in subsequent years? Colleges are not doing they're not making judgment calls. We're not performing cash flow analyses or anything like that. But we are taking everything into consideration to come up with an appropriate economic strength there, just to get a sense of what we think parents, families might be able to contribute. The key here is that it's not about the family's ability to pay versus their willingness to pay. We're looking at the ability to pay. It's the families who then are focusing sometimes on their willingness, to pay for some of the colleges out there. But I can't stress enough how much special circumstances come into play here, because in the world of financial aid, there's no such thing as TMI, too much information. We really, maybe sometimes, but really we want to know everything that's going on, because we want to be able to give as much financial aid as we possibly can. And throughout this process, communication is vital. We want parents to be on the same page as the college so that you're doing what you need to do when you need to do it. So a really good question to ask colleges through the process is truly, how will you as parents know what you need to do and when you need to do it? Because there are some colleges, not the majority, by no means the majority, but some colleges who are very conservative when it comes to FERPA and privacy laws, that they will only communicate with the student. And their primary means of communication is by email, even though we know that students don't read their email nearly as much as we adults do. But that's still some of the primary means of communication that colleges will use. And those that will only communicate with the student hope that the student will share that with the parents. But a good question, as I say, to ask colleges, does my student need to give you expressed written consent so that I know what's going on, or is it just an automatic thing? And I've used this example before, but it's one of my favorite stories, where I was talking with a family and I told them, like at Lake Forest, for example, we automatically carbon copy the parent on every communication that goes out of our office. And the student was like, carbon copy? Like, right, yes. I'm showing my age and my old school there, but I explained, what that CC colon is. Well, that's where it came from. And really what it means is, yes, we copy the parent on everything that goes out of our office. Most colleges will do that, but it is a really good question, because I'll tell you, we are your advocate. We are trying to do everything we can, but we also want to make sure that we are on the same page and that you're taking advantage of all of the programs that are out there, but also doing everything that we ask you to do, on a timely basis. Because what we're doing is creating a financial aid offer. We're tailoring a response to you based on the FAFSA information, maybe based on the profile, maybe based on some of those standalone applications that we ask you to fill out. But it's a financial aid award letter that will tell you what our costs are for the upcoming year, what your student is eligible to receive in grants and scholarships and student loans and work study, and basically what your out of pocket will be for that year. Financial aid is renewable for all 4 years. You will complete a renewal FAFSA every year for federal financial aid purposes. Many colleges will ask you to do that as well, only to get a sense of how are things going. Are things changing? Have you won the Powerball? Were you that $500 million single winner? Then maybe we can't give as much need-based aid as we did last year. But really, it's just to be able to continue the financial aid for all 4 years. And colleges will do everything in their power to make sure that what you get first year, you'll get for all 4 years, or maybe even sometimes all 5 or 6 years. Now, the award letter itself, the offer that's made to you, cosmetically may look very different depending on the software programs, or the means of communication that the college uses to share that with you, whether it's an email or a hard copy in the mail or something online, on the student portal that they have to access. There's an initiative for a common financial aid award letter, which we'll see in just a second or so. But in essence, these award letters will tell you the same thing, kind of what your out of pocket is when all is said and done. Now, the makeup of the award letter itself may look very different depending on the college, because quite honestly, some colleges have more dollars to award. Their philosophy 1 year might be to award more music scholarships than they did last year because they really need to beef up the music department. So colleges have their own needs as they build their freshman class. And so they may put more dollars into some areas that they never did before. And depending on the cost of the college itself, as well. Here's the common financial aid award letter initiative that I talked about. Many colleges will send you something similar to this. It won't look like this, but in essence, it will tell you what the costs are for the upcoming school year, for the direct costs, the tuition fees, room and board, and the indirect costs for books and laundry and travel expenses. It'll give you an idea of what the gift aid is, the grants and the scholarships, and then tell you what your net price is. So after looking at the direct costs and subtracting the grants and the scholarships, the gift aid, this is what your net price is. But here are some student loan options for you and some work study options. And here are some other options that are out there for parents, maybe a payment plan or loans for the parent, like the federal parent loan. It also gives you a lot of good consumer information, as well. So a lot of that information that we saw on the Navigator and that you'll see on the scorecard will also be shared with you on the financial aid award letter itself, because, for a couple of reasons. One, the buzzword these days is ROI, return on investment. And a lot of colleges are very proud of their return on investment, like, for example, Lake Forest and us making, some of those top lists on, number one in ROI for students. But I just throwing that out there. But a lot of colleges will tell you, hey, we're pretty proud of the fact that our graduation rate is 90%, or our student loan default rate is 0.01%, or the earnings, that students, if they go into get a job right away, what the earnings range are, or that the placement rates into grad school or medical schools, again, like Lake Forest for our medical school and grad school was 100% out there. But a lot of the colleges will give you the same consumer disclosure information on their award letter itself. Because they can look very different, not only cosmetically, but sometimes the makeup and sometimes where things are on a page. There's some really good websites out there that help families compare apples to apples with the award letter itself. And I'll be very honest with you, I've seen some award letter examples from other schools that even I can't decipher. And so I go to some of these websites. I particularly like, finaid.org and ISAC.org. I kind of particularly like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They ask some questions and they put it in such a way that you really are comparing across the board, very apples to apples. Throughout this process, deadlines are huge and they're very essential. We have moved from kind of soft deadlines of priority deadlines to more drop dead dates. Colleges know historically how many applicants they receive, how many dollars they have to award. And so if a college tells you that you need to get either the admission application done or the financial aid application done by a certain date, you need to get it done by that certain date. And it's not only the admission applications, but the financial aid applications, scholarship applications, for the college itself and for some of these outside scholarship sources as well. And if you're like me, I'm a very visual person. For me, out of sight, out of mind. So, I mean, if you saw my desk in my office, everything is on top of my desk. I don't use my drawers for anything. Well, historical data I do, but really out of sight, out of mind. So maybe if it helps you, create a spreadsheet for yourself and either put that on your computer or maybe tack it to your refrigerator. What you've got all the different colleges out there and what's required and what the deadlines are, and a contact person as well. So yeah, I talked to Jerry at Lake Forest College and everything is in. We should hear by January 15th. Another good rule of thumb is to look at all the different colleges. And when you get to that moment in time where you're looking at the deadlines, if you get everything done by the earliest deadline, whoever has the earliest deadline, get everything done for everyone by that early deadline, and then you're golden, if that's even possible to do. That way you're not, spending, working on one college 1 week, you get that done. Okay, now let's work on another college and let's work on this third one. I think I've talked to many families who have said, it helps when we just kind of look at them all, get everything done, and then you literally sit back and relax and have really good conversations, with colleges. Because to give you a sense of the timeline, in order to access the FAFSA, you need to create a username and password. The student needs to create one and the parent needs to create one, and it's called the Federal Student Aid ID. You need that to get into the FAFSA. You complete, and you'll use that also to sign the FAFSA electronically and to enter your information in there. Complete this soon after October 1st, as possible, whether it's the FAFSA and the profile or the school's applications for financial aid. Check if additional applications are either required or beneficial, because you want to receive your financial aid award letter and you want to ask us questions. We want you to ask us questions, especially the sooner the better, because there's a drop dead date, kind of, still out there. The lines are getting a little blurred a little bit, but May 1st is traditionally, historically called the National Candidate Reply Date. Some colleges adhere to this May 1st date. And after May 1, if a student hasn't committed yet or accepted their financial aid, then all bets are off. Colleges rescind offers of admission, rescind offers of financial aid. Again, the lines blur a little bit and some colleges will work with that. And we love when students and families commit earlier, well before May 1 is absolutely, wonderful to do. But I like that the FAFSA is available now that you're completing this, hopefully sometime in next month in October, or November, so that we get the results at the college level, and then we can have much better relaxed conversations, and we're not scrambling, at the last minute. Lots of places that you can get help. You've got some absolutely wonderful counselors, at West and at North, and I don't say this just because they're online with us, but maybe I've trained them well, and certainly they have gotten kudos from many other places. But take advantage of their knowledge, and they know that if you have questions that stumps them, even they can call me anytime, because I love answering questions. I love problem solving. I love just kind of helping families through this process, because I don't want it to be a hurdle. The college's financial aid office, there'll always be a point person there. I've got a couple sites here that I put down, and even some videos that are out there on not only the college's website, but the Federal Student Aid has its own YouTube channel. And I like this video that I put on here, how to create your Federal Student Aid ID. On our website, a couple of years ago, I was coerced into creating our own little videos. I didn't mind doing it, but I've not watched them at all, because it's one of those things where you can't watch yourself. But so we've got videos, 1 minute, 2 minutes long on how to fill out the FAFSA, how to create the ID, what are special circumstances, how to read your award letter. More and more colleges are doing those little videos or little vignettes on their websites. I feel like I've talked a lot, and I've talked very quickly because I wanted to kind of get through all of this, because sometimes I could talk, and I really could talk for hours, but sometimes the very best part of this are your questions, themselves. What's important to you, kind of what's on your mind that I did not address. So at this moment in time, I think I'll take another sip of water. I'm going to stop screen sharing, and we will maybe, yes. I will turn it back to Dan and Allegra and Jerry, and they will kind of coordinate the question and answer. I will answer every question that you throw at me.
Great. Thank you so much, Jerry. We've got some really great questions in the chat. And just as a reminder, if you have a question, please put it into the Q&A. But we will start kind of in order. There was a great question that came up at the beginning, and it is, do colleges with quarter systems cost higher than colleges with semester systems for the overall annual net pay or net cost?
Great question. And the short answer is no, they don't. I mean, colleges cost what they cost. It doesn't matter if they're based on semesters, trimesters, quarters. No, it doesn't matter.
Thank you. There was another one. How do divorced parents handle filling out the FAFSA? Does one parent fill it out or both parents fill it out respectively?
So in the case of divorced parents, it's only the parent that the student is living with. That's the parent that fills out the FAFSA. It doesn't matter if one parent claims them as a tax exemption. It doesn't matter. It's whoever the student is living with or has lived with the most. That's the parent of record on the FAFSA. That's the parent that fills out the FAFSA.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I think I just lost one. Can you talk a little bit about the concern with FAFSA and families who are stuck somewhere in the middle, making too much but can't afford it, maybe not making a little enough to qualify for state or federal aid?
Yeah, that's a good question because, as I mentioned earlier, the FAFSA is just an okay application. I mean, it has been around for decades and decades, and it's more of a starting point than anything else. So what's happening is colleges are recognizing that, yeah, this middle income, kind of family, which can range anywhere. I mean, there's some middle income families where I just read the definition of middle income can be as high as $110,000. So colleges recognize that families may not qualify for federal or state aid because there's not as many of those dollars. And so colleges will compensate for that. Not the public universities so much as the private colleges themselves. Public universities kind of compensate because their costs are lower to begin with, but the private colleges will compensate and try to offer their own funding to those families. Quite honestly, I see more and more grants given specifically to middle income families who are just kind of in that no person's land, don't quite qualify for these grants, but don't really have enough. On paper, it looks very different than what is happening in real life.
Thank you. If my family has a high net worth or at least investment properties that are worth about $450,000, but an income of under $95,000, how would that affect my FAFSA?
Yeah, that's also a good question because inherent in the FAFSA process, in this magical formula that's used, there is kind of a balance between income and assets. So there are some families who may be asset rich but income poor, and vice versa. So there's part of the formula that kind of balances that out and says, okay, maybe some of that asset strength is being used to help pay for some of the family's living expenses. Here's another thing real quick, and I have to be careful. I don't want to make short answers even longer, but a question I'd received from a family a week ago is there's just a standard cost of living inherent in the FAFSA. Well, anywhere around here, anywhere in the North Shore, anywhere in the Chicagoland area, can be very different cost of living than in the middle of Nebraska or the middle of Iowa. So the FAFSA does not take that into consideration, but again, the college does. And that's one of the pieces the college will look at when talk about compensating for some of the incomes that are out there.
Thanks, Jerry. We've got a couple questions, just clarification on, multiple students, multiple children. Do you fill out the FAFSA just once? Cases of already have one child in college or two seniors. Can I fill out the FAFSA one time, or do I have to fill it out multiple times? So can you just clarify that again?
Yeah, just to clarify, you're filling out one FAFSA per student in college. So if you've got two kids in college, then you're filling out two FAFSAs. Each one will be specific to that student, although the parent information will be exactly the same on both. And there is a feature on the FAFSA that allows you to transfer the parent information from one FAFSA to the other. So you're not starting from scratch with the parent information on the second FAFSA.
If I have a part-time job, do I put that with the student tax income? And will they give me less financial aid when taking that into account?
So if I have,
the student is asking if I have a part-time job.
the student is asking that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's about $5,000 of what the student earns is protected because we know that the student is spending it. I mean, either it's spending money or to help with some of their expenses. So again, inherent in this formula, it's if a student earns up to $5,000, it's ignored. It's as if they've earned nothing. So if a student earns more than $5,000, then it also kind of goes through this calculation where very little of it is taken into consideration. And the other thing that a college will almost always reach out to the student who has earned a lot of money, say they're senior year in high school. They'll ask if that student is going to continue to earn that much when they're in college, because in many cases, students are earning money up to go to college, but then once they get to college, they're not earning. They don't have that job anymore. They're living on campus, so they're not at home or something. So colleges will reach out, and in cases where the student income is decently high, they'll ask if that's going to continue.
You addressed this in terms of your experience with Lake Forest, but is it possible to ask for more financial aid than what was given according to our FAFSA?
Yes, you can. I mean, I would be less than honest if I said that you couldn't go into a financial aid office or a college and say, look, is there anything more out there? No. That said, for some colleges, no might be the ultimate answer that you receive. And so they may not be able to offer you more. A lot, unfortunately, sometimes in this world, in my profession, I can answer every question with it depends, because sometimes it depends. It depends on the college itself. It depends on what their class is looking like as they build it and whether they've got any funds left, quite honestly. But yeah, as educated consumers, I mean, it never hurts to ask.
What if in 2020 taxes are on extension? Can we file using extensions, or do we need to file 2020 prior to applying for FAFSA?
Good question. If your 2020 tax return is not already filed, if it's just an extension with the IRS, then you can go in and fill out the FAFSA yourself, manually putting in the numbers of what you think 2020 looked like. And then ultimately, when the 2020 tax return is filed, then you'll plug in the real numbers. And again, I mean, most extensions, only last until the middle of October. So hopefully you will have gotten that done by the time you do, because remember, we're in the 2021 calendar year, or 2021 tax year. And so hopefully you'll get the 2020 tax return done soon after you fill out the FAFSA, or yeah, because ultimately colleges will ask you for the final 2020 tax return. All very good questions. Keep them coming.
If divorced or separated parents have equal or joint custody, do we just choose which parent is the parent of record or the custodial parent?
Yeah, that's a good question. And as part of the definition, the question says, with whom, if it's joint custody, then with whom did the student live the most? And with 365 days in the year, it may be one day more with one parent than the other. But then it really does come down to a judgment call, on the parent, who the student lived with the most or who gave the student the most support, quite honestly.
This one parent asked again about twins. If they have twins, they have to fill out each have to fill out a FAFSA. Will the FAFSA take them into consideration when determining what the parent can pay?
Yes. So one of the questions on the FAFSA asks how many kids you have in college. So it asks that question so that it kind of divides your resources among all the kids that you have in college. If, let's just say you make $100,000 and you've got one child in college, then, it's looking at, okay, well, your income is being used hopefully to support that one child. If you've got two kids in college and they're saying, well, your income basically is divided in half. I mean, literally the formula divides everything in half when figuring out the financial aid eligibility. So, or divides it by the number of kids you have in college. So yes.
For 2020 taxes, I'm not sure if they said they will be filed as qualified widow. In 2021 will be filed as single parent. Will this impact the first year of FAFSA? My child has one parent income now.
No, it will not at all. So it doesn't matter, the filing status, whether it's qualified widow or even had a household or single parent, it won't matter. Filing status doesn't matter. It's just the income that's looked at.
If a student is applying early decision to a school, can they also include a second school on the FAFSA application?
Yes, you can put as many schools on the FAFSA as you wish. We don't see the colleges on the FAFSA. That was taken off a few years ago where, there used to be a time where you would list the different colleges and colleges would see which ones that, you sent the FAFSA to. Not that they did anything with it. I mean, there was talk that some colleges did, maybe, but I really don't think so. But now we're blind to any other colleges that you list. So yes, you can put as many colleges as you want. You reach schools, as you're applying for admission too, you put your reach schools on the FAFSA, your for sure schools, so yes. I have to make my answers a little shorter, I think. Sometimes I just kind of go on and on, don't I? Sorry about that.
So it's kind of the same question. I'm going to answer this one. You're allowed to list up to 10 schools on your FAFSA. And if you want, so any school that your student is considering right now, they should put them on there. And if there's looking at 12, 13, 14, after it's been processed, you could take out 2 or 3 schools and then add the new schools.
Yes, correct. I mean, you have to wait for the first 10 to be processed, but really when you get your confirmation that it's been processed, which can be like within 48 hours, then families, you can go back into the FAFSA. And again, it's a weird setup on the FAFSA where if you're going to add the 11th or 12th or 13th school, you have to replace one of the original 10 with it. But it doesn't matter because once the school has it, they have it. They have the information. They never fall off of the FAFSA.
Right. How does immigration of the parent affect the FAFSA application of a U.S. citizen son/daughter?
I'm sorry, what was that?
How does the immigration status of the parent affect the FAFSA application of a U.S. citizen?
It doesn't affect it at all. It doesn't matter what the citizenship status of the parent is. It only matters about the student. The student needs to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. They need to have a social security number in order to fill out the FAFSA.
How do you create a FAFSA ID? How do you create a FAFSA ID?
Ooh, I don't know if it's me.
It's FSA ID. How do you create an FSA ID?
You literally go to a website called fsaid.ed.gov. Or what I would tell families is go to the fafsa.gov website, and there's a link on there as well. You can get to it a couple different ways. I don't know if I'm freezing up, or if it's, I hope I'm not. Dan, you work for me a little bit.
Sorry, I didn't pay my internet bill again.
No problem.
Do any of these FAFSA contain to the community college, or do they pertain to trade schools? If no, is it necessary to fill out the FAFSA?
You can use the Fafsa everywhere, and almost everyone, every college, every university, every trade school, has financial aid that they can offer, to a student, whether it's federal or state at the very least. And a lot of the publics and even a lot of the community colleges have their own grant programs as well. So no, FAFSA for every school.
If a student is taking a gap year, does it make sense to do the FAFSA this year, or do we wait until next year?
You could do the FAFSA this year just to see what it looks like, and then take a gap year, excuse me, and then do the FAFSA again. Doesn't hurt. It's probably a nice exercise to do. That said, let me also say, you shouldn't do it if you don't have a senior in high school. You shouldn't do it for your junior, because that can mess things up. The student should be a senior in high school for you to do the FAFSA.
How do you search for specific skills or track or merit-based types of scholarships online? Any advice on scholarship searching?
Yeah, and Allegra and Dan, you can probably add to this as well, but I see some of the major scholarship search services out there like FastWeb or Broke Scholar, a lot of different places. And the colleges' websites themselves, more and more colleges have a page on their website that talk about outside scholarships, so point students in that direction as well. But I don't know, Allegra and Dan, how would you answer that?
Both schools actually have a scholarship section specific to our district and our schools. And I believe that both of us also have a section on our websites that address outside scholarships. Some of the go-to websites and search engines that have been successful for our students in the past. Dan, is there anything you'd like to add?
Same thing. We have a scholarship website, and so we have local and national scholarships on there.
If I could jump in too, and I apologize because my camera's not working. This is Jerry Pope. Jerry, you might agree. We find that most of our students have more fortune in terms of getting local and community scholarships, and oftentimes maybe from their religious institution or from a parent's business or credit union or whatever. Some of these national scholarships are highly competitive. There's thousands and thousands of candidates applying. So the best source is always going to be directly from the college or for the government. And then I think local and community scholarships and so on.
Yeah, I agree, especially because a lot of the information that we get at the college from the scholarship sources are targeted to our students, so they'll say, students who typically go to Lake Forest or meet these criteria. And so we disseminate that information as well. So yeah, Jerry, you're right. I mean, a lot of those are more the national ones, like, yeah, the Pepsi Cola one, sure, you can apply for that, but you'd be surprised how many like Kiwanis or Pullman or things like that are probably a little easier to get.
When is the financial award letter sent? Is it sent with all decision? Also, is the net price given on the letter constant for all 4 years?
So let me do net price first. Net price, it depends. Yes, I mean, what your out of pocket is for first year, that's what you can expect, to be for all 4 years, given, any kind of huge cash influx that you might have. Timeline wise, in terms of when financial aid award letters are sent out, typically, in talking with my colleagues all over the place, it's typical for an admission letter to be sent first, and then for the financial aid offer to follow up, let's say a week to 10 days after that. A lot of colleges want the students to just, revel in the fact that they've been admitted, and then the financial aid offer says, well, here's how you can afford it. Some will do kind of the best sense of the one-stop shop where you'll get a little packet of information with the admission letter and the financial aid. But we try to not make it too overwhelming because there's a lot of information that we want to share with you.
Can you address the Parent Plus loan and what that is?
Yeah, so just like the student loans, there are federal loans for parents, and they're at very low interest rates. They're decently easy to get. I mean, unless a student has a bankruptcy on their record or severe delinquency, pretty much every parent can receive a federal parent loan. And what I see a lot of times happening is, as families look at what their out-of-pocket is going to be, they'll then explore, okay, well, do we have a 529 plan to help pay for some of that? Or how can we finance what our out-of-pocket is going to be? And many of them look at the federal parent loan because it's decently easy to get. It's at very low interest rates. You can get as much as you need to cover the costs, and you really don't have to start paying it back until the student is out of college. The interest accrues on it, while the student is in school, and you can pay the interest down if you want to. But I think of all the kind of financing plans out there, the preferred one that a lot of colleges will tell you is the federal parent loan.
These questions are kind of similar. How do you add our new FAFSA account onto our parents' existing FAFSA account? And then how do you link a FAFSA account to the parents' account?
Yeah, so there'll be a question on the FAFSA, so when you enter the FAFSA and you answer all the student information and you answer all the parent information, at the end of the parent information, and when you submit it, after you submit it, you get your confirmation page pops up. There'll be a question on there, a little box that says, do you need to fill out another FAFSA? And do you want to transfer the parent information? If so, click this box and a new FAFSA opens up where you just have to enter the parent's information. I think that was the question, right? Yeah.
Is the FAFSA available in other languages such as Korean?
The FAFSA is available in Spanish right now. I don't think it's available in any other languages. They are adding additional languages. I know they're adding Polish. They might be adding Korean. But I don't see that right now, unfortunately.
And just to add to that, our family liaisons are happy to assist any of our families that would benefit from translation services. So before we wrap up this evening, we'll talk a little bit about the resources that we can offer in our schools, and we can certainly assist with that.
What is the most aid can you get?
What's the most aid you can get?
That was the question.
You could get everything. I mean, yeah, there are some schools that give a full ride. Now, some of those schools are Division I schools, and the full rides are given to athletes. More and more schools, though, I see are offering full tuition scholarships. Very few schools offer full ride scholarships, tuition fees, room and board. But there are more and more schools that are offering full tuition scholarships. And then if a student lives on campus, then the room and board is covered with something else.
I'm going to answer this one. The question was, when will school transcripts be submitted to colleges? Submitted applications and getting emails from college requesting the transcripts. I would encourage you to go to your student's counselor in the high school to say, I've applied to this university. Will you be able to upload my transcript? Will you be able to submit your letter of recommendation? Or when do you think you could do that? I know that our counselors have been busy at both schools, and so they're probably processing these requests now. But as a student, you should go in and ask the counselor to upload it for you, or just to remind them, gently remind them and nudge them. Allegra, do you have anything you would add to that?
I would just add that if a student has applied via the Common Application, then the transcript would be uploaded into the application itself. Otherwise, it would be through parchment. So yeah, same thing applies through Niles North, counselor or the guidance secretary, Ms. French. There's a question I just wanted to address live concerning parent status versus student status. So the FAFSA is available for all students who are U.S. citizens or permanent residents, regardless of parental status. And yes, students who have parents without tax forms can still absolutely file the FAFSA. For students that are DACA or undocumented, there is actually a new form as of last year. It's the alternative form via the RISE Act. And for students that may qualify under those circumstances, either being DACA or undocumented, please see myself or Mr. Jin, and we can assist you with filling out that alternative form.
Yeah, that's a good, thanks, Allegra. That's a good point about the RISE Act app.
Yes. Jerry, if the parent has a loan, or if the parent has a student loan debt, does that negatively impact my child's eligibility for aid?
No, not at all. It has absolutely nothing to do with your student's eligibility for aid.
Do students need to disclose a trust fund or an inherited pension money?
If a student's name is on any kind of asset, like a trust fund or something they inherited, if the student's name is on there, then yes, that's the student asset and they have to report it. Now, I talked about parent assets. So a couple things I want to just kind of clarify or expand on, because I love doing longer answers. But unlike the parent assets, which are very diluted, for the student asset, anything in the student's name, 20% of it is used as a resource toward their college costs. So if a student had $10,000, for example, in a trust fund or some kind of fund, and their name is on it, then $2,000 of that would be used. The college would recognize that $2,000 of that could be used toward their college costs. And let me go back to when I talked about the parent assets and I talked about the 529 plans. The 529 plans are those education savings plans that the parents opened, and own. Doesn't matter, which student is the beneficiary or anything like that. It's the parent. If the parent opened it, it's a parent asset. If the grandparent opened it, it's ignored. It's not listed anywhere, or another family member or neighbor or anything like that.
Sorry, I'm trying to answer some of these live. We have a lot of questions about, like foreign assets and what is actually considered when reviewing FAFSAs in terms of like percentages and assets in general.
Yeah, so especially with assets, it's the value of it. So if you have access to something, then you list it because you have access to it. A lot of times families say, well, how do I value, other real estate or something like that? It's your call. It's kind of what you think you could get for it, what you think the equity is on it. And especially like if you, for example, own real estate with somebody else, then it's only your portion of it. So if you have a cottage and you own it with another person, then you're only reporting half of it, half of that equity. Same with kind of foreign investments too. Parents, you guys have to do the kind of the legwork to figure out what it would be worth if you could access it, and when you access it. Oh, here's another good question too. I talk about the income is 2020. That's what the FAFSA asks for. The FAFSA kind of takes like a snapshot in time. So although the income is based on 2020, all of the other information is as of the time you complete the FAFSA, what is your asset strength? How many kids will you have in college? That type of thing.
There's a question on the FAFSA form, Jerry. At the time you're submitting, how much money do you have cash in hand, in your checking account, your savings account, etc. How is that considered into the FAFSA formula?
Yeah, so unless it's a lot of money, unless you've got it $250,000 in a savings account or in your back pocket, it's not going to be taken into consideration. The FAFSA and the profile and the college itself recognize that, there's the question about, what you have in cash, savings, and cash. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's the end of the month and I only get paid once a month. So I have very little cash. And now I have very little cash because I'm using credit cards. I don't want to touch dollar bills, anymore. So that's not the intent, is to find out exactly the dollar amount. It's more the intent of, do you have any savings that you could use for college, quite honestly. And that's why it's diluted so much. So even if you did have $100 in your pocket, or, home equity of, $100,000 on a second home, it's not going to come into play much at all.
So I think some of this can be consolidated. There's a lot of questions about, financial assets / income level. Is the FAFSA right for me to apply to? Same thing with if I'm thinking about going to Oakton, is the FAFSA right plan for me to explore? So just to kind of revisit what you were saying earlier about, there's no harm in applying for the FAFSA. There's it's worthwhile to do regardless of your circumstances.
Absolutely. You have nothing to lose. Just do it. I mean, there's no cutoff. There's no, debt to income ratio that's done or anything like that. And I've seen families. We have a family at Lake Forest whose income is, and in fact, I had to double check this the other day. Their income is $482,000. But they are also receiving the federal Pell Grant. And that's because it's a large family and they've got 4 kids in college. So it's variables like that kind of come into play a lot.
Another question regarding divorced families. It's only the custodial parents fills out the FAFSA. Does it follow that universities will only bill the custodial parent for all costs, regardless of what the divorce courts may have ordered each parent to pay? Can the custodial and non-custodial parent be listed as guaranteers for payment?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we see that a lot where, there is an agreement that says this parent pays 50%, the other parent pays 50%. It's an agreement that you have to make with the college itself. So you would fill out kind of a promissory note of sorts with the college saying, hey, this is the agreement. So I, as one parent, will pay 50%. This other parent will pay 50%. Send the bill to both of us. Keep us both on the account so we both have access to it, because we're both paying for it, basically. But that's an agreement it's individual agreement that's made with the college itself. But honestly, the college will do anything you want in order for it to get paid. I mean, they don't care. They just want to get paid.
How does an athletic scholarship affect FAFSA?
For many athletic scholarships, you still have to fill out the FAFSA, because a lot of athletic scholarships take Pell Grant and state grant into consideration as well. And so even if you have a huge athletic scholarship, sometimes it's reduced by the amount of Pell Grant or the Illinois MAP grant that you may get. But FAFSAs need to be completed even for athletic scholarships. I used to be the athletic liaison when I worked at DePaul University many, many, many years ago. And so you worked with a lot of the athletes in that way.
Okay, maybe just like one more question.
Yeah, ask
Okay,
away.
good one.
Yeah, let it make it the best one ever. Stump me.
Dan,
You find one first and I'll find another one.
can student loan debt negatively impact, can parent student loan debt or any sort of parent debt negatively impact a child's eligibility for financial aid?
No, unless the parent is not paying that student loan debt. If they've gone into default on their student loan, then it still will not affect the student's eligibility, but it will affect the parent's ability to get another parent loan, themselves, if that's what they wanted to do. And Sometimes if parents have filed bankruptcy, some colleges will take those bankruptcy payments into account as an expense that they cannot get out of. So kind of depends on the type of bankruptcy itself, but sometimes a parent has gotten to the point where they have to file for bankruptcy, and so colleges will recognize that.
Okay. What other source of money a student might have, such as CDs or stocks, does that need to be disclosed? And how about foreign assets?
So, I mean, if a student has cash in their piggy bank, or stuffed in their mattress, how are we going to know? But anything that they have, that they have access to, every parent and student should be kind of reported. But again, I go back to, if you've got, let's say a student has savings of $1,000, but they're going to use some of that for maybe spring break, if we have a spring break this year, or prom, or something like that, fine. We don't want to know about that. We don't want to know about, something that an expense that you're going to use it for, a reasonable expense. Foreign assets, that gets tricky, especially these days, because depending on the economies of the different countries, depending on our agreements, we have some families who have assets in other countries, and they can't leave. Those assets cannot leave the country. They just are not allowed to leave. So it's an individual kind of question. If a parent has something like that, they should ask the college. They should go into greater detail, because the college will ask for, well, where is it? What type is it? That type of thing. Is there a treaty involved, etc.
A point of clarification also is when you guys create a FAFSA account, log in as a student, because it is their FAFSA, it is theirs that they have to create. Parents will sign it on their own. And so a lot of questions is, do I go return as a new user or a returning user? If it's the student's very first time, they go in as a new user. If they go back in to make corrections, they go in as a returning user. And then one last question, should we hire somebody to fill out the FAFSA, like paying an accountant, or to do our taxes?
No.
It leads us into our next section. Legger, do you want to share those other slides? We are going to give you some resources that we can help you with to help fill out the FAFSA form. So at Niles West, and at Niles North, we have ISAC core members. Ours at Niles West is Jennifer Gijada. She is a Spanish speaker. So if anybody from Niles North needs a Spanish speaker, she could come over here. We will have FAFSA Fridays beginning this week, October 1st. She will be in the College and Career Resource Center. You can email Sarah Holmes at sarahole@d219.org or call her 626-2594 to schedule an appointment. So you don't need to hire anybody. She works for the ISAC, and she could fill it out for you, to help you fill it out in the College and Career Resource Center.
And similarly at Niles North, we have Jack Hosek, who is our ISAC core member. He was with us last year as well, so we feel very fortunate to have him once again. And his contact information is up at the screen. You can always email him, call him, or you can schedule individually with him as well. If you'd like to come in for our Fafsa Tuesdays as a parent or student, you can do that on a Fafsa Tuesday, and to schedule an appointment, all you need to do is email nilesnorthccc@d219.org or call Miss Lauren Lee, who is our College Counseling Center assistant, at 847-626-2176 to schedule on a Fafsa Tuesday. To kind of go back a little bit, and Jerry definitely touched on this during his presentation, but beginning last school year, it now became a graduation requirement in the state of Illinois to complete a FAFSA, or, as I mentioned, the new application for state financial aid, or the alternative form for students who are DACA or undocumented. And the last resort would be the waiver or opt-out form. For the waiver and opt-out form, there are going to be circumstances where students and families will not be completing the FAFSA or the alternative form. And we just encourage our families to discuss that further with Dan or myself or their school counselor before doing that form. And if you're not sure where you fall, what form to fill out, in the slide deck that we sent via the chat a little while back, you can refer to this slide. So there were some questions about whether or not it was the right path for you to complete a FAFSA if attending Oakton or a trade school. We want to assure you that regardless of your pathway, your post-secondary pathway, it's not a waste of your time to complete a FAFSA. And also just more information about that alternative financial aid form for Illinois students. Additionally, we really encourage our families to follow us via social media. We're both on Instagram at Niles North and Niles West, and programs such as this or reminders about colleges visiting us, and our Fafsa Fridays and our Fafsa Tuesdays and all of our workshops are promoted not only through email and through the websites, but also via social media.